Howdy, y'all. I'm just waiting for a few more people to get in, and then we will take off. Have a little tete-a-tete, a little conversation. Okay, we've got a pretty good group going, and a few more continuing to join us. Today, one thing I'm gonna talk about for sure is the importance of healthy bowel regularity. Now, that can mean tons of stuff. Often people that are, pooping once a day and everything's pretty good don't want to hear this. You need to hear this. This is actually, we're going to go over a lot of issues, and these have a massive effect on health in general, and then, of course, on bowel health specifically. So Catherine had sent out an email newsletter, excuse me, email newsletter, and had a cute little title. It's what was it?
This poo will pass.
This poo will pass. And so really we were looking at, or I was looking at recently, some recent studies on constipation risks, and even more importantly, on looking at what certain medications do to increase certain risk factors. So I want to go into a little more detail with that, be here to answer some questions about that, because it's really an under considered issue. Okay. In Chinese medicine, it's not. When my wife was in school, she and many of her friends got T-shirts made that said, "I pooped today," right? Because they would constantly talk to each other about their poop. And it's a huge topic in Chinese medicine and Ayurvedic medicine. And, it's quite understandable. One, it's very important. And two, it was something that you could actually see. They didn't have labs, Ayurvedic medicine, Chinese medicine, Japanese medicine, etc., and older Western medicine. So you had to look at signs and symptoms, like you look at people's skin, like we still do in Chinese medicine, take pulses, which they used to do in Western medicine also, looking for correlations, looking at the tongue. I can remember watching cartoons on Saturday morning when I was, probably 65 years ago, and they had cartoons where Daffy Duck would be the doctor, and he'd be talking to what's his name, the duck. Anyway, yeah, but yeah, anyway, they'd be talking. The one of them would be the doctor, one would be the patient, and he'd say, "Stick out your tongue," and he'd stick out his tongue, and there'd be a big overcoat on it. He says, "You have a coated tongue. We have a serious problem here." Unfortunately, doctors don't do that anymore, and you can tell massive things about someone's health by looking at their tongue. In fact, you can do complete diagnostics by looking at someone's tongue. Now, I like to get more information than that, but it's a very powerful, complete system. So today, I'm going to share my screen with you in a moment, and we are going to talk about poo, all right? It's interesting. I always confuse this, by the way. I had a book, one of my patients, I've seen a lot of ulcerative colitis patients. That's an inflammatory bowel disease, similar to Crohn's, generally not quite as severe, but she had treated her for her entire family for this. And she brought in a book called The Book of Poo. And then she went to Europe and found it, and it was the Book of Poop, right? They put a P on it, or vice versa. I don't remember. But apparently they're different. And then my son, when he was a little guy, 2-3 years old, had a book entitled Everything Poops, right? And it talked about how to analyze poop, etc. So, okay, it's a really important subject. So I'm going to share my screen with you here. At least I'm going to attempt to. So there's a reminder here. Beginning March 26th, we will have Sunday clinic hours. Delightful acupuncturist coming on board with us. And she'll be here from 8 on Sunday morning until 2 in the afternoon. A lot of experience. And so we're really looking forward to having her here. Her name is Gabby. Okay, so this poo will pass. So let's talk mostly here about constipation. Now, in Chinese medicine, loose stools are very significant to us also. However, a little bit of loose stool doesn't concern me anywhere near as much as a little bit of constipation, okay? Most of our population is constipated. In China, the average number of bowel movements is 3 per day in a rural population, not urban necessarily, but in rural populations, it's 3 bowel movements a day. In most indigenous populations, people kind of living off the land, hunter-gatherer type environments, 3 bowel movements a day is typical. In the United States, now this is the entire US, and that's different than California, but the average number of bowel movements is 1 every 3 days. So that means rural China, they're 9 times more likely to have or have bowel movements 9 times more often than the people will here in the US. And what's significant about that, other than being just feeling horrible, is that the rate of bowel cancers is about 10 times higher in the US. Not a coincidence, right? You got 10 times as many bowel movements, or bowel movements 1/10 as often, and you have 10 times the bowel cancer. What does that tell you, right? You need to get those things out of your system. Now, that's not the only problem with constipation. There are many. You can develop diverticuli, which are excruciatingly painful. Outpouchings in the intestines become infected. You may need surgery. And also, the bowel, the large intestine, is designed to reabsorb fluid and other products from the lumen of the intestine, from the inner intestine, the hollow part. And so that gets pulled across the tissues into the bloodstream and into the system. And that includes toxins, poisons, etc. Those can get hormones is a big problem. Some women are overutilizing the hormones by 5 to 10 times because they keep reabsorbing them when they should be passing out with the stool. So it's really important to keep that flow very, very open. And so, as Catherine pointed out here, in Chinese medicine, organs are not just organs. Connected to each of the organs is a complete energy system. And these can be traced out, and it's very easy to prove they're, quote, real, and can be stimulated with acupuncture and lots of other methodologies. And they're measurable. The levels of energy in them is measurable. The course of them is measurable, et cetera. And so with each of those energy systems connected to an organ, there is a particular affect, often called an emotion, but that's not really a big enough word, an affect and energy that's associated with it. And it's important to know that if you're constipated, that doesn't just affect the physical large intestine, it actually includes other elements. Now, the large intestine's paired organ is the lung, and the lung's tissue is the skin. And the number of people who have concomitant bowel inflammation and skin inflammation approaches a 1-to-1 ratio. If you have bowel inflammation, you will probably have skin inflammation. They're that closely hooked together. Now, the energetic relationship in the body and the organ and the energy system, is that the large intestine pathway is associated with emotions of sadness, loss, grief, and guilt. Now, those are largely because of its relationship with the lung. And the lung is called often the repository of grief, okay? So all of those things will happen because of that lung, large intestine relationship. Now, the stagnation is directly a large intestine problem. You'll find people who have stagnation in their lives, I'm going to say it, where they just, they're sluggish, they really can't move. Once they change that emotionally, often their bowels will open up, and often if they work from the other side and open up their bowels, they don't have as much stagnation in their life. So you need that free flow, okay? And that can lead to all sorts of pathologies or illnesses that really make it difficult in the flow of life. Now, when those emotions become really deeply habitual and ingrained, the body can manifest this as constipation, diarrhea, lower abdominal cramping, etc. And those energy imbalances can actually lead to physical weakness and provide emotional introversion, where you can't or don't want to actually participate so much in life. And when it says ingrained, that's a really good word. I find that with a lot of adults and teenagers, I actually have to retrain them in how to poop. Okay. Seems ridiculous, but the mechanism goes something like this. You've got the kids are getting up before school. They don't want to get up, so they're running around late. They don't take time to really eat breakfast and relax, and they particularly don't take time to sit on the toilet. The time of the large intestine is 5 to 7 a.m., and you're much more effective at having healthy bowel movements if you're sitting on the toilet before 7 a.m. Now, it's not an absolute, but it's just much easier. And so I'll have a lot of like teenage girls with acne, and acne is often, probably most often, a liver, large intestine heat problem. And we've got to get that stool out because it's just overheating their body. They're getting flooded with toxins. The toxins have to go somewhere, so they come out in the skin as acne. And so I will actually have them drink something warm, do a little massage on their abdomen in the direction that the large intestine flows, and sit on the toilet, whether they have to go or not. And within a few weeks, they will start to have more and more healthy bowel movements before 7 in the morning. Now, what happens is, as children, they're in a hurry. They don't want to take time to go to the bathroom, so they start suppressing the urge. They get to school. They don't want to raise their hand and say, I have to go to the bathroom. And they're too busy during the breaks being with their friends, and they don't want to seem weird having to run off to the bathroom. So they then learn to suppress the urge even more. And after a few years of suppressing that urge, you don't even feel it anymore. So they don't even know they need to poop anymore. And so you have to retrain that so that they can feel that. I know that can sound weird, but I see it all the time. It's a huge issue. Now, that stagnation can lead to depression. In Chinese medicine, when we talk about depression, we're generally talking about something that is depressed, like there's energy holding something down. So you can have blood depression where the blood isn't moving. You can have heat depression where there's heat trapped in the body. You can have damp depression where the dampness isn't moving. But so it's actually being held down. Then you get irritability, and then apathy and discouragement. And then it can also stimulate panic responses that patients often have no idea that those panic responses are being triggered by their gut. And then they produce spontaneous defecation due to the body's reflex actions. It's very well known by police officers that often they'll find at the scene of a car burglary or some other burglary or attack, that they'll find that someone has pooped on the sidewalk or under a tree or something, because that stress can stimulate a reflex action to release the bowels. Okay. Very, very common. So imbalances that affect the large intestine are really common in our modern society due to excess stress, constant worry. Again, but the vagus nerve, because that's called the wanderer, and vagus is the wanderer in earlier times. And so it is the nerve that creates the most relaxation in the body, and it is the most important for stimulating the organs of digestion and in your body. It's what controls, to a large measure, heart rate and variability, large intestinal flow, small intestinal digestive processes, stomach digestive processes, etc. So when you are under high stress, the vagus nerve isn't being activated, or very little, and the other nerves are being activated that put you into a high stress sympathetic nervous system state. And so your digestion stops. Literally, it will stop for hours. And people wonder why stress causes stomach aches and stress causes all these problems. It's because under stress, you release epinephrine, which one of the jobs of epinephrine is to lower the blood flow to your internal organs and increase blood flow to your extremities and your brain so that you can run away from the tiger. If you're faced with digesting your breakfast or running away from a tiger, the body will prioritize running away from the tiger. That's what they're called. And it will pull the blood out of your intestines. This is a major problem for fertility because it pulls the blood out of the ovaries and out of the uterus. So they're not getting the proper blood supply. And those are very important issues for unexplained infertility. It's that stress response. So again, it's not a single event of stress, it's the constancy that is so difficult for us. And again, Catherine, I got a little ahead of thing here, but she's talking about stimulates the body's parasympathetic nervous system, which controls all of these glandular and sphincter responses. Now, one of the things that I'm reminded of when I was talking about having 3 bowel movements a day, there is a reflex that whenever you chew, put things in your mouth in general, particularly if you chew, it stimulates a reflex in the large intestine to start peristalsis. So if you're eating 3 meals a day, you should have 3 bowel movements a day. And those will usually occur half an hour to an hour or so after you eat the meal. And that's normal. That's the way it should be. Again, 1 a day is our minimum. If you're not pooping once a day, you have a problem. And it's a serious problem that can lead to increased dementia risk, et cetera, bowel cancer risk for sure. And so we want you to become a whole person again. And so that when you eat, you get that stimulation to your large intestine and it stimulates you to go to the bathroom. Now, after surgeries on the intestines, often they'll have people chew gum just for the purpose of starting that peristaltic activity in the large intestine. Yeah, I'm sorry. When the sympathetic nervous system is constantly stimulated, the body can't rest and digest. And so that leads to a lot of the digestive disturbances that we have. It's kind of, in Chinese medicine, one of the things that I love about it is it's so poetic, right? For example, until the 1700s, there wasn't even a word for sex. You had to kind of do these workarounds, conversations in the bedchamber. They didn't have really words for the sexual anatomy. And so everything is very beautiful, actually. And so when the Chinese describe having a bowel movement, they say it's like floating a boat or sailing a boat. First, you need a boat, right? You need something to move. And a large portion of that is the fiber you eat, although about 50% of a typical bowel movement is actually bacteria, probiotics, bad bacteria, and also some skin tissues. So that's about half of the boat. And the other half is generally fiber. So you want the fiber to kind of wash through, it's like sweeping a broom through the intestines, but it will form a boat, which is a stool. And so then the second part you need to float a boat is you need water, right? It's got to have something to float on. And that's the water that comes from the large intestine. Now, remember what I said before, the job of the large intestine is to take this very, very liquid matter that's passing through the intestine and pull out the water, or a lot of the water, to solidify the stool. And a big part of that is so that you don't become dehydrated and die. Many of the worst diseases on the planet, the biggest killers, kill people through diarrhea. A lot of the things that you hear about that people died from historically, these huge epidemics of typhus and cholera, et cetera, people died from pooping out too many fluids, and they would dehydrate and die, literally. So that's an important job for the large intestine. However, it can do its job too well, right? Particularly if the stool is in the large intestine for too long a period of time, it will pull out too much water. And so then we want to do something. One is to speed up the bowel transit time, but also take something that's going to help increase the water in the large intestines. Now, we use something called buffered C, which is kind of a magical blend. And I can't figure it out because I can take all the ingredients and give it to patients, but it's not as effective as using this one supplement. And it's basically primarily a vitamin C and magnesium supplement. And those are both known to reverse the osmotic flow. So it pulls the water back into the intestines, and it will make softer, more watery stool, or at least not such a hard stool. Now, there are drugs that do that. The drugs are actually, we're finding, quite dangerous for dementia risk. So I prefer the natural methods. And then the third is the wind, or in Chinese medicine, we call it the qi, the energy, right? That's actually moving the boat across the water. And that's the peristaltic action, where the nerves are stimulating the large intestine to rhythmically spasm and move the stool along through the intestine. So the important thing, critically important, if someone says I'm constipated, is figuring out which of those three problems or something else it is, right? Is it the wind? Do we need to stimulate peristalsis through either doing acupuncture to stimulate the neurology, or some herb that's going to stimulate peristalsis? Or is it the stool's too dry? And you see this a lot with older people. They're actually given a bulking agent, psyllium seed, for example, and it makes them worse because now they've got an even larger mass of stool, but they haven't increased the amount of fluid, so they get even more constipated than ever. So you need to know which of these is the problem. Now, closely related to the water part of it, the river, is a sub-element, which is oil. And so getting enough oils, like from seed, chia seeds, flax seeds, walnuts, etc., can cause a little more oil in the large intestines, which also lubricate and help move things through. One question I get often is people are kind of surprised. They go, first thing in the morning, I have kind of a hard poop. I'm a little constipated. It's hard to pass. And then half an hour later, I get almost diarrhea. And that makes obviously perfect sense. That first bowel movement has been in your system for quite a while, right? Everybody's different, but it's going to be in there at least since the day before. And so the intestines have pulled out more water, more fluid from it, so it's more likely to be hard. Once that gets through, then behind it is a fresher bit of stool that hasn't had all the water taken out. And so that's going to pass very easily. And our goal, of course, is to make the first bowel movement pass as well as the second bowel movement. Okay? So anyway, if any of those isn't working properly, you're going to get constipated. And the most common form of treatment in the West is laxatives. And there was a study done very recently, published just in February 22nd of this year, in Neurology, the medical journal of the American Academy of Neurology. And it says, people who regularly use laxatives may have more than a 50% increased risk of developing dementia than those who do not use laxatives. So I hope you're listening, right? Now, we know that if you don't poop often enough, you can have up to 10 times the rate of bowel cancers and hormonal problems, etc. But if you have to use laxatives, you then have a 50% increased risk of developing dementia than people who do not use laxatives. Scary. Now, they found that people who use only osmotic laxatives That's the type that attracts water into the colon to soften the stool at an even greater risk. Now, one of the problems with that, and why I'm willing to use vitamin C and magnesium for that, is that we're looking at different realms of treatment principles, not treatment principles, but types. And so in the West, they'll often have docosate sodium to do that, or polyethylene glycol. Polyethylene glycol is what you find in antifreeze. Now, I've got to think that is not really very healthy for you. So if you're taking that, I could certainly see a potential increase in dementia. All right. So at any rate, you want to get your bowel movements really, really well balanced. So regular laxative use changes the microbiome of the gut, and that can affect nerve signaling from the gut to the brain. It can also increase the production of intestinal toxins that affect the brain. Lots of different mechanisms by which it can work. The important thing is it does increase dementia risk. So they found that regular use of over-the-counter laxatives was associated with a higher risk of dementia. And again, people who use multiple laxative types or the osmotic laxatives. And they took 502,000 plus people in the UK Biobank database, average age of 57, who did not have dementia at the start of this study. And 3.6% reported regular use of over-the-counter laxatives, and regular was defined as using laxatives most of the days of the week during the month. Over an average of 10 years, 1.3% of those developed dementia. Of those who did not regularly use laxatives, only 0.4% developed dementia. So that's saying here, although they quoted 50% before, that 3 times more people are developing dementia if they use over-the-counter laxatives. And the more different types of laxatives were used, the greater the risk. 28% increased risk if there was one type, 90% increased risk. You hear that? Double the risk of dementia for people who are taking 2 or more types of laxatives. So when you're thinking about, oh God, I'm a little constipated, I may not go to my doctor or my acupuncturist or whatever, is it really worth it? Well, I don't know. What is it worth to you to reduce your dementia risk by almost half? I think it's worth a lot. In another study published in the Annals of Internal Medicine, they determined that acupuncture, and more specifically, electroacupuncture, where we're passing a low intensity electric current between the points, they were a very safe and effective treatment for chronic, severe functional constipation. So this wasn't mild or moderate. This was severe constipation. They found that this was very effective. And then you're not needing any other laxatives, even from us, if we just use acupuncture. And it goes on to talk, they received a certain number of sessions of acupuncture, and they tracked the number of bowel movements, but the bottom line was it was extremely, extremely effective. All right. So any questions about poo?
Yes.
It's interesting. I had to go to the hospital a couple years ago. I had something, I had to stay overnight, and I had a cyst that was drained. And I had 7 different doctors and 7 nurses and 4 doctors. Not one person used the term bowel movement. And until last year, I would always say, are you having, a bowel movement every day? Because I thought that was appropriate. 11 of those people, not one of them said that I asked if I had a bowel movement. 9 of them said, have you pooped? And 2 of them, a delightful Filipina nurses, said, have you had a poopy today? So I don't use the term bowel movement much anymore because nobody else does. So anyway, did you have a poopy today, everybody?
Yes, it's the most medical term. What fiber do you recommend for constipation?
That's a great question. Everybody's a little different. Some people do better with soluble fiber where it dissolves. Some people do better with insoluble fiber. the bottom line is I like all fiber for constipation. There are fibers that I prefer a little bit more for blood sugar reduction, things like that. Those are the konjac mannans, the glucomannans, et cetera. And so the nice thing about those is you can handle the bowel issues and some blood sugar issues at the same time. But really, lots of vegetables, chia seeds, flax seeds. Flax is hugely used throughout South America and Central America. Often black flax, but I don't think it has to be that. But they'll take like a tablespoon of flax seeds, put it in boiling water, and let it sit until it's of a temperature you can drink. And it actually turns into a gelatinous mass. It looks like snot, but it has no flavor. And drink it. And it's amazing in terms of helping with bowel movements, but also relieving all sorts of intestinal problems. So I love the seeds for that. But any vegetable pretty much, and most fruit. Apples, fabulous. Apple pectins, very powerful for many, many different things, including helping with constipation.
And kiwi.
Kiwi's great also.
Yeah.
And what I use to stimulate peristalsis in people where the chi's a little weak are just regular old prunes, right? The old idea of prunes or prune juice. I also like apricots. So I'll have them do 2 prunes, 2 apricots. They 99% of the time they start pooping normally. Okay, so those are fabulous.
Yeah.
Some people use beets. The advantage of using beets is you can track the color of your bowel movements and see how long your transit time is. There is dye that you can buy for that purpose that your doctor will do, but beets do the same thing. The red will show up in your stool, so you can see how long it's taking for people to pass through your GI system. If it's passing through too quickly, you may not absorb nutrients well enough. And if it's taking too long, then you could be reabsorbing toxins.
Yeah. What brand is the buffered C?
Yeah, we use orthomolecular. And again, I don't know why it's better, but we find that it's almost foolproof with our patients.
Yeah. And I think Thorne has something similar.
They do have something
But
similar. I didn't get quite as good a results.
right.
That could be bias on my part. It could be that we didn't have a large enough sample size, but I just know the buffered C works almost all the time.
That's great. When you boil the flax, do you use whole seeds or ground seeds?
You can use either. It is the boiling water. And again, remember, don't drink it while it's boiling. The boiling water will add, and you don't boil the water. You take the boiling water and just pour it over it in a glass or cup and let it just sit. I've used whole seeds mostly. I think that having them ground would be a little more effective, but I don't. I just do them whole.
Yeah. Okay, great.
Okay, I got some great questions from Aaron about eye supplements and also about some strange results from melatonin, which you can get very strange results from melatonin. Melatonin may be the master antioxidant. It's at least one of the top antioxidants for the brain, but you can get some paradoxical results where instead of causing you to sleep, etc., it can cause you to wake up. It can cause you to have wild, crazy dreams. And so I don't have time to go into that today, but I will go into it next week. And also, this person mentioned several different macular degeneration preventive supplements and wondered about them and wondered if there are any others. And the answer, Aaron, is yes. There are others, and they all work slightly differently. Yours are mostly anthocyanins, and there are some other ways to go about it. And I'll talk about those next week. Okay.
A few more questions.
Okay, questions.
How about papaya flesh seeds?
Flesh seeds? I don't know. I've never used it. My recollection, and this is like from 50 years ago, is they're a little bitter, but I may be making that up. So I don't know. I would recommend doing a little more study with that because I'm unaware.
Yeah. The prunes and apricots, do you soak them or just eat as a dried fruit?
I eat them as a dried fruit, or I have my patients eat them, but you certainly could soak them,
Yeah.
right? That's fine.
It tastes good dry.
Yeah.
Okay.
That's it. So be poo with happiness. I guess
Mm.
that's the key, right? And poo a lot. The more the merrier, up to 3 times a day. If it gets much more than that, then there's probably an inflammatory issue. But 2-3 times a day is ideal. 1 is the minimum. You got to poop at least once a day. And you can learn to do that without any assistance other than maybe some warm tea, etc. The other thing that's one of the best bowel stimulators is a cup of coffee. I mean, all of my teenagers that drink coffee, and I'm trying to train them, it's like I have them drink a cup of coffee, do a little bowel massage, a little, external abdominal massage, sit on the toilet, and it's pretty much foolproof. They will start pooping regularly within a few days.
All right.
All right. So anyway, thank you for tuning in. I want to just really thank you for sending in your questions and joining us. And stay tuned. We're going to, over the next few weeks, we've got a bunch more stuff coming up. I want to talk about our cardiology series that I think, although it's designed for practitioners, I think many of you have plenty of understanding that you could get value from it. Our book will be published. It's at formatting right now, so it'll be a couple, yeah, probably end of April, and then we're going to start doing some podcasts going through that and talking about different tests, and I think you might be interested in that. Okay, so until next Thursday, be happy, be healthy.